Hello, it is Ryan, and I was on a flight the other day playing one of my favorite social spin slot games on ChumbaCasino.com. I looked over at the person sitting next to me, and you know what they were doing? They were also playing Chumba Casino. Coincidence? I think not. Everybody's loving having fun with it. Chumba Casino is home to hundreds of casino-style games that you can play for free anytime, anywhere, even at 30,000 feet. So sign up now at ChumbaCasino.com to claim your free welcome bonus. That's ChumbaCasino.com and live the Chumba life.
No purchase necessary. VGW. Void where prohibited by law. See terms and conditions. 18+.
Hello and welcome to the third episode of the Extreme Sports Performance Podcast. My name's Ryan Blake. I'm the founder and CEO of Extreme Sports Performance. In this episode, I'm going to be speaking to Ben Haining. Ben is a friend and a colleague who I've known for 10 years. He's currently the head of strength and conditioning at Reed School in Surrey. He's the chairman of the YSCA, the Youth Strength and Conditioning Association, and a trustee of the Elena Baltasher Foundation. In this episode, I'm going to be asking Ben the questions I ask all my guests. Who he is, what he does, where has he come from, and what has he done along the way? What are the 3 key moments from his career so far? What are his top 3 areas of interest? What are his 3 most valuable things that he's learnt to date? Who are his top 3 influencers? What are his top 3 resources for information? What are his top 3 sports performance exercises or drills? What are his top 3 pieces of advice in life, exercise and or sport? And where can people find him? We also, as we usually do, have a little bit of a freestyle chat at the end, talking about things outside the box. We really enjoyed recording this episode, and we really hope you enjoy listening to it. Here we go. Ben, thanks for joining us on another episode of the Extreme Sports Performance Podcast. Very excited to have you on.
It's a pleasure, mate. Thank you for inviting me.
So can you just start by letting people who might not know who you are and what you do?
Okay, so name's Ben Haining. I'm a head of strength and conditioning currently at Reed School, which is based in Cobham in Surrey. And within my role at the school, I also coach a few sports, and I am also sort of head of the middle school boarding house. So I look after a group of 40 boys in boarding in a pastoral role as well as the strength and conditioning role. So that's currently what I'm doing. I'm also chairman of the YSCA, the Youth Strength and Conditioning Association, and I'm also a trustee of the Elena Baltasher Foundation. Those are the sort of key headlines at the moment.
Fantastic. And how long have you been at Reeds for?
So I began in 2009, September. Prior to that, I'd worked for the LTA, which is where our paths sort of crossed for the first time.
Yep.
And prior to that, I was head of strength and conditioning at Sussex County Cricket Club from end of 2003 through to sort of the beginning of 2008 or sort of end of 2007. And then prior to that, I was sort of at Loughborough, and then played various sports and didn't quite make it in a number of sports growing up. Sort of did my sports science degree and then moved into sort of coaching and strength and conditioning, having had a little stint as a PE teacher in a state school, Warden Park School, which was my previous, my actual school that I went to.
Yep.
And the only other thing I would suggest is that I was an assistant coach on the GB women's wheelchair basketball team and went to Athens in 2004. So those are the sort of various bits that ran concurrently in my time working in cricket.
Fantastic. No, that's great. I think it's really useful for people to get an idea of your background and your journey, because everyone's either starting theirs, halfway through theirs, or coming towards a different turning point in there. So it's good to share those things with everybody.
So yeah, you touched upon it just now that our paths cross for people who might wonder how we know each other. When I started in my first proper strength and conditioning role as head of sports science for Wynn Academy at Bisham Abbey, you were the strength and conditioning coordinator for the South for the LTA. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah. So I used to have the pleasure of coming to see you every couple of
You
weeks
did?
and watching you work.
Fantastic. So for Ben was basically for people who don't know, my kind of first, I suppose, mentor in strength and conditioning and sports science, and kind of really kind of told me the way things are, and just as always kind of helped guide me and help me progress at different stages of my career. So I'd just like to take the opportunity to say thanks for that, mate, because you've definitely helped and have been very, very good to me and given me a lot of opportunities that wouldn't have existed without you there. So very grateful for those.
Oh, not at all. It's a privilege, mate. Privilege.
So a couple of so we're probably going to get through about 10 questions. A lot of them are top 3 questions, just to keep things kind of short and sharp, but also to give people digestible kind of takeaways to leave with. So we'll kick off with what the top 3 key moments are from your career so far.
Well, I think with a quite varied career like mine, I was thinking about this question and what I would suggest. I think from a pure performance strength and conditioning perspective, as a sort of an event, when Sussex won the 2007 county championship in the cricket, that was a particularly significant moment because I was very fortunate to kind of ride on the back of a very talented team with a couple of absolute magicians in the team. So I would not for one second take credit for that victory, but I would certainly feel that I played a little bit of a part. But where 2007 was particularly pertinent was because in 2006 we'd actually won the double and we had a small but very talented squad of 17, 18 full-time professional players plus the academy. And in 2006 everything had gone our way. We pretty much lost, I think we only lost about 5 or 6 games of cricket across all competitions, and everybody was fit and everything was hunky-dory. It seemed pretty easy. I would rock up, warm the guys up, do stuff in the gym with them, work on stuff out on the field and help, and it all seemed like a bit of a kind of easy ride, having had a few challenging years prior to that.
Yeah.
But 2007 was very different. It's very different when you're working in an environment and you're the hunted team rather than the hunter. And that's what we were, and we had a number of challenges with a lot of players getting in.
Step into the world of power, loyalty, and luck.
I'm going to make him an offer he can't refuse.
With family, cannolis, and spins mean everything.
Now, you want to get mixed up in the family business.
Introducing The Godfather at ChumbaCasino.com. Test your luck in the shadowy world of The Godfather slot.
Someday, I will call upon you to do a service for me.
Play The Godfather now at ChumbaCasino.com.
Welcome to the family.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
And it went right to the wire. And I remember it was a hugely emotional final day of the championship. We were waiting on other results. And I believe at the time we only had 10 and a half fit players out of the squad. So you can appreciate the sort of build-up to the run-in was very fun and quite stressful. So for me, if you were to kind of take a moment when we won that championship, when probably I'd had to be at my best in terms of resilience and managing challenge, that was a first sort of key moment for me.
Okay.
And I can remember when we won, in previous years it was lots of celebration. I actually took myself off quietly into my little shoebox of an office and just sort of had my head in my hands for about half an hour trying to take it all in, because it really was an extremely emotional and sort of tense and in the end joyful experience, but one that certainly shaped my understanding of what pressure performance sport is like.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. And would there any other moments maybe in different roles or different times of your career that are key for you?
So I think in terms of key moments, as I sort of mentioned, I'm a trustee of the Elena Baltasha Foundation, and I was very fortunate to work with Elena, bless her, who passed away in 2014. And there was obviously some very high moments when we saw her win a few matches at Wimbledon, and then break the top 50 in the world. But of course, when we lost her, that was a very significant moment in my life, if that makes sense, where all of a sudden, I certainly, the highlight with working with her was watching her achieve her dream of going to 2012 and playing and winning some stuff at 2012, winning a match there, and working with a great team with Nino Severino and a number of people around her. But then, of course, when we lost her, that was kind of significant in my life and made me pretty much reflect on everything and how I see the world and view the world. So some great highs there, but also a very, very challenging and emotional moment. So that was significant.
Okay, well, no, thanks for sharing that. I mean, it's something that we've spoke about in the past, but it's I think you learn a lot from the periods of life where things don't go the way you expect, and you are challenged, not just in your role, but as a person. So I think,
I agree, and I think the reason I share that is it's very easy when you're working in sport or strength and conditioning or any sphere where you can become quite selfish and self-absorbed about what you're doing, where you're going, what you're going to achieve, and how you're doing. And sometimes life reminds you that there's a much bigger picture out there, and actually perhaps your coaching and your outlook on life should be affected by things in your life. And she was a wonderful person, and we sort of celebrate her memory and do a lot of work for her. And I just feel she changed my life and made me understand the important things in life. So that's why that's significant. And then on a third one, I felt tremendous pride really in. I think I wouldn't be wrong in saying that I was pretty delighted to set up one of the first youth strength and conditioning programs here at Reeds, and watching that grow and seeing a couple of years ago the first group of my athletes who had effectively done a 7-year stint with me, and seeing them grow from sort of young kids through into sort of young men was really special. So again, you can always pick out that moment that was a win or a nice experience or that was exciting, but actually very often adding all the moments together. So watching them sort of graduate, as it were, leave the school with their A-levels, knowing that they'd been through a program with me for 7 years, and I'd stuck to a sort of program of that kind of length and duration, and then watching them progress and seeing them move on and pass on to the next exciting phase of their life, that was very significant for me as well. So hopefully 3 quite different takes there.
Yeah, fantastic. No, thanks again for sharing that with us, Ben. I think people will find that interesting, and also it's not all about work, is it? I think it's all about what you do, and when you do it, and how you do it, which kind of shape you in towards that, I suppose, the person you are today, but also the kind of coach you become.
I think that's the thing with coaching, and I think for anybody that goes down the coaching pathway, unless you're very special or very, very lucky, probably the latter, you're probably not going to make millions and millions of pounds. You might do very well, and there are some people that have achieved that, but you make a choice to sort of hopefully become an expert working with people and motivating and supporting people. And we'll sort of allude to it later on, but that joy that you get from that is really important. And of course, when you're coaching people, you're not just dealing in sets and reps. As a great sort of mentor and friend of ours, Brendan Chaplin, would say, you're dealing in personalities, and you're packaging and supporting people. And ultimately, people really don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And I find that is a massive mantra for me, working with young people who are going through a lot of challenges and growth and changes, emotional, physical, mental. So that is something that's significant. So if you go down that coaching pathway, you get the joy, but you also have to be incredibly self-reflective. And that's not to say other sectors aren't like that, but it's not a clock on, clock off type of life. And so life very much influences your coaching, and coaching influences your life, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more, mate. And I know I've also just started a role at school as well, at St Paul's in London, and I'm starting to realise that even though it's a school day and it's not a boarding school like yours, it's still a full-time role that you have to really kind of be 24/7 on top of, because you're responsible for so many different things.
A holistic development of young people, because ultimately when you're in pro sport, as you have been and you've experienced, you obviously want to develop people, but fundamentally you're there to win. You're there to win matches, win trophies, and win the crowd over. And clearly in the school environment or working with young athletes, obviously winning is a part of it and you want them to be successful and to go along their pathway, but actually them developing as well-rounded, fantastic young people, boys or girls, into young men and women, is a far more significant thing in that kind of broader holistic sense. Clearly everybody loves and is engaged by teams that win, and you only have to look at how much people got behind the British Lions and all the various different teams that do well, the women's hockey in the Olympics, and those role models are huge. And
Hello, it is Ryan, and we could all use an extra bright spot in our day, couldn't we? Just to make up for things like sitting in traffic, doing the dishes, counting your steps, all the mundane stuff. That is why I'm such a big fan of Chumba Casino. Chumba Casino has all your favorite social casino-style games that you can play for free anytime, anywhere with daily bonuses. That should brighten your day a little. Actually, a lot. So sign up now at ChumbaCasino.com. That's ChumbaCasino.com.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. See terms and conditions. 18+.
Hugely important, but fundamentally that focus is narrow. As I've said earlier, it's about winning and actually developing a young person into a decent human being and developing their talents and their physicality and athleticism alongside that is a far broader goal.
Thank you for helping me out there. I was partly distracted by the dustbin men outside making more noise than is humanly possible, so that threw me off a bit. So that's my excuse there for losing my train of thought. So I think that leads. I only learn all these excuses from you, mate. So the next question, which I think will lead quite nicely into what you've just spoke about, is what would you say your top 3 areas of interest are right now in your current role?
So areas of interest, I think you can get very much into specific S&C. So I'm fascinated at the moment about the management of cumulative load in relation to young people's training and balance in their lives. So adding value athlete and improving them physically is obviously the goal, but clearly they get pulled in a lot of different directions, whether that's academic, other clubs, sports that they play at school or don't play at school, academies, regional, England, all of that. And working with parents to manage that cumulative load effectively, and make sure that they're mentally healthy, happy, not overtraining, not undertraining, dealing with all of the challenges that teenagers particularly find in life from a recovery perspective.
Yeah.
And sort of that whole area fascinates me. And then obviously there's subsections within that in terms of, certain, potential injury markers that you see going as young people go through peak height velocity in relation to cumulative load and all that sort of stuff. So in terms of what really interests me from the pure S&C side, that's where I'm really looking at things at the moment.
Fantastic. And with regards to your role as chairman of the Youth Strength and Conditioning Association, are there any specific areas of youth strength and conditioning at the moment that really are kind of interesting you and challenging you into finding out more information?
I think when you're as old as me, Ryan, and you've lost all your hair, some of us haven't got a lot left. You start moving into that cycle of, without in any way sounding arrogant, you've seen a lot of what's out there.
Yep.
And actually,
yep.
you know, whether that be physical competency, physical literacy, speed, plyometrics, power training methods, Olympic lifting, all of those kind of things, core training, different types of core training, what is core training, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
You've been around long enough to see pretty much everything, and then you move into the realms of trying to work out what is actually the right order and the right value and how you're going to put things together. And that's very much something at the YSCA that we try to sort of instill the idea that it's not about elite performance, it's about health before performance. Great performance is important, but really building those physical literacy blocks from a young age and earning the right to progress. And of course, each time a young person progresses, you open up a new level of training or type of training or modality of training. And obviously, it's not kind of you go through one stage and then you do the next thing. Things are running concurrently. So they might be learning to do the Olympic lifts, for example, with broomsticks and lower loads. But when do you slot things in, and what bang do you get for your buck and value with the time that you have with those young people, all of those sorts of things.
Yeah.
I think in terms of a progressive area that interests me a lot is you may have come across this a little bit, is that the GPS technology is becoming more accessible from an affordable perspective for people. So I know, for example, our first 15 rugby squad this year have had a good year, and I know that your school, they've got fantastic rugby pedigree. We've been using the GPS data more, so we've been able to actually look at sort of volume of collisions, G-forces when the guys are having collisions. So linking that in with our sort of concussion protocols and managing workloads with those guys, that's pretty progressive in a school environment. It's very standard in pro rugby and pro sport. But now that a lot of these products are becoming more accessible and universities want to do projects, I think that's probably the most cutting edge stuff in terms of management of the athlete and the training load and those sorts of things on the youth side. And then it's just a question of navigating where people are at and making sure they go through that sort of physical literacy pathway and develop the skills they need that are applicable to their sports or the activities that they do.
Great answers. No, I really can resonate with what you're saying there, because I'm having much of the same I suppose challenges as well in trying to understand as much about what to measure in order to be able to give yourself, the athlete, the coaches, the parents, a much clearer picture of how fatigued is this athlete, and what's the next best decision for that athlete in terms of training, rest, etc. And I think it's important not to overly complicate it, but it's also important, if you have that data, you have almost a duty of care to do something with it. I
think just to interject slightly there, I think you made a really valid point there, and I want to be clear, is I'm very much, I love the research and the data. I'm very much a practitioner, and I would suggest, and this is just a sort of an arbitrary figure, but I would suggest 90% of strength and conditioning with young people is all about coaching what you see, physical literacy. Can they push, pull, brace, rotate, squat, lunge? Do they manage themselves? Do they recover well? Do they stretch well? All of that data helps inform, the growth data and that sort of stuff. But all of that is about high quality, simple, done, common things done uncommonly well, coaching. And actually, the GPS stuff is kind of the kind of cool stuff that people want to jump on. And very often, as you know, you can become totally, and a lot of coaches do get affected by, well, the data says this and the data says that, and you can lose your colleagues, you can lose the kids that you're working with, and actually you can lose the whole point of what you're trying to do. Having said that, if you've got highly conditioned athletes who are doing, or young people who are doing a lot of the right stuff, and you have access to the data as you suggest, and it can inform you with the right kind of information, then absolutely you should be looking at that and acting on it. But again, it comes down to what you can access and the budget. But I would certainly say to any budding S&C coach out there, you don't need to spend loads of money on kit to be doing a great job with young people and getting 90% of the job done absolutely brilliantly. And I would want that to be a headline message.
Sure, no, I completely agree, and I think it is important to reiterate that the simple things done well with
Ryan Seacrest here. When you have a busy schedule, it's important to maximize your downtime. One of the best ways to do that is by going to ChumbaCasino.com. Chumba Casino has all your favorite social casino games like spin slots, bingo, and solitaire that you can play for free for a chance to redeem some serious prizes. So hop on to ChumbaCasino.com now and live the Chumba life. Sponsored by Chumba Casino.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
High quality are what make solid athletes and robust athletes, and it's important not to get too carried away with the icing on the cake you've got to make the layers of the cake first solid and in the right order before you can start putting fancy icing on top of it and starting using a lot of these technologies out there which are good but are also irrelevant. And if you haven't done the important things first.
Yeah, and I would say to you, Ryan, as I said, I've been doing it a while now. A lot of this stuff is only really becoming accessible now, and I know it's great when I'm working with sort of slightly younger coaches like yourself and Jason Ellis-Woodley, my colleague here at Reeds, is a fantastic practitioner. There's a lot of good people who are very comfortable using things like the push band and looking at velocities and all those sorts of things. And also, we've got to remember that the young people love a bit of technology. They're the technology age.
Yeah.
And they can often engage with that material, and you can use it really as just a sort of a buy-in to help them buy into what you're trying to do and understand what they're doing and how their body's responding. But you can't get away from the fact that you can have all the GPS data in the world, but if they can't push, pull, brace, rotate, and haven't got good physical literacy, and they can't manage themselves effectively, and they're not, and they're training the right volume, then there's not a lot of point in having the sort of frills on top.
I think one thing I've found. I mean, I've been at St Paul's now for nearly a year. So about 10 months is the first year has just been spent on educating the athletes there and the coaches there on like the very like simple building blocks of strength and conditioning, and that's really as complex as it's got. But that simplicity and kind of basic approach has led to quite positive results in terms of sports performance, and definitely a big noticeable reduction in injury as well. And that's really exciting because we haven't really got stuck into much of the the complex stuff yet, and the simple stuff's made a big difference already. And
yeah,
I think
absolutely, and I think you do right there. I think you do right. I think another thing I would suggest to you as well is asking me about other sort of key areas of interest. The broader health impact within a school population, the broader impact on mental health of young people, which is much more in focus now. And clearly, in our boarding house, we've got some fantastic young men who are on their pathway, but obviously with that there are pastoral issues. And I think you've always got to reference the fact that the strength and conditioning work, the stuff in the gym, has to fit a big part of the whole. Yeah. So that's where I really want to look at and getting this idea as well that strength and conditioning isn't just for the elite; it's actually for everyone. And filtering it into PE lessons, games lessons. One of the things I've noticed, it might seem a bit strange, is that we've got a much more, athletic training, interested in health staff body where we are now.
Yeah.
And these people are all fantastic role models for the kids. So if they see a geography teacher getting ready for the London Marathon or training in the gym, doing some lifting and pretty competent, you build that community with your environment of sort of health, and it couldn't be further away from whether or not you win or lose. It's about whether we're all progressing together and enjoying being healthy and making good choices. So these are all the sorts of things ruminating with me at the moment.
Fantastic. That's a great answer, and I think I strongly agree with people, especially young people, being shaped by their environment, and if they've got those positive influences around them, it's only a healthy thing. And strength and conditioning isn't necessarily making just the body stronger and more conditioned. It's making the person and I suppose their mindset stronger and more conditioned as well. Just teaching them these things and these principles which they might not have come across before. Developing the person as a whole, not just in physical areas, but in mental areas as well, and just complementing their overall development.
Well, there is a lot of research coming out that talks about, fact globally, children that do more exercise achieve more academically. I was privileged enough to go to the Directors of Sport conference with my colleague, one of my many bosses here, and there was some good stuff coming out of that, talking about what we all know, but if they've got a balanced life and they're physically active, levels of academic achievement and self-esteem are far higher, and these are the great global challenges we face in terms of childhood obesity and counteracting that. And that again is a big part of what we're doing with the the YSCA and very much myself and Brendan Chaplin's vision. So yeah, there's a lot to be done. There's a lot to be done, but it's all good stuff.
It's good, and people have got to start somewhere, and I think using that Youth Strength Conditioning Association platform is a great starting point if people are a little bit lost.
Yeah, I think what we're trying to achieve with it is we're just trying to make sure that we make it accessible without in any way watering down really important content of how to do it safely, effectively, and appropriately.
Fantastic.
So that's what we're trying to achieve.
I'll make sure that there's a link to the website in the show notes if people are interested in that.
So youthsca.com.
Perfect. I'll make sure there's a link to that too, so people can check it out in their own time. So just moving on to the next question. It's quite a broad question. It's another top three, but what would you say the top three most valuable things you've learned in your career are?
Wow, I think it's interesting. People often, I'm sure many of your listeners are going to be very much looking at S&C components, and don't get me wrong, I'm not devaluing any of the specific S&C principles in terms of things that I've learned, but I would suggest I'm kind of at a stage in my life in quite a reflective time, bearing in mind 40 with 2 kids and, mortgage to pay. Yeah. You don't have much time to reflect, but you do think about these things, and I would suggest that the first thing I would suggest is that there's a certain type of leader that you want to work for and that you want to become yourself. And I think that leader is somebody who bases all of their actions on integrity and a powerful value set. And I think we're all different. We all have strengths and weaknesses, different personality types. But every single leader that I've ever worked with, and I try to be as a leader myself, is successful if the people that they're working with believe in their integrity and their honesty and their value set and their work ethic and all of those sorts of things. So the first thing would be that.
Hello, it is Ryan, and we could all use an extra bright spot in our day, couldn't we? Just to make up for things like sitting in traffic, doing the dishes, counting your steps, all the mundane stuff. That is why I'm such a big fan of Chumba Casino. Chumba Casino has all your favorite social casino-style games that you can play for free anytime, anywhere with daily bonuses. That should brighten your day a little. Actually, a lot. So sign up now at ChumbaCasino.com. That's ChumbaCasino.com.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. See terms and conditions. 18+.
Second thing would be, it is incredibly important to strike a balance between having huge self-belief, but with an element of leaving your ego a bit at the door. Yeah. You need to have belief in what you're doing and your courage of your convictions and whatever it is that you're doing. So if you're that young person who wants to become a strength and conditioning coach and it's difficult to get a job because there's so many applicants and it's hard to get what you believe that you're worth, you've got to have big belief and you've got to be smart and pushing yourself forwards and developing yourself. But the other thing is you've got to, a lot of young coaches I've experienced, and I was that guy, very quick to believe your own hype and believe that you're a bit further down the line than maybe you are. So you have to strike that balance of huge belief, because if you don't believe in yourself, people won't want to work with you and you won't get the jobs and you won't do a great job. But at the same time, having a bit of humility and having the ability to be self-reflective. So many people that you work with aren't self-reflective. And it's okay to look at yourself and go, I could have done that better, I could have done that differently. These are my strengths, these are my weaknesses. How do I complement my weaknesses? My wife's quite good at pointing that out, actually. I found that's quite effective on the weakness side. But I think that's my second thing. And then the third thing I would say, again, it's not pure S&C, but anybody working in S&C and coaching will often find themselves leading and putting a team of people together. And I had a great privilege a few years ago. It was actually the same year as the 2007 cricket experience. I actually got the opportunity with the team to go and visit Brighton Children's Hospital. Yeah. And I got there was a presentation by the head surgeon there, and clearly dealing with parents and children whose lives are in precarious positions, and kind of made what we we do feel pretty humbling and not irrelevant, but you know what I mean?
Yeah, sure.
And it was very interesting because at the time we went down there, and again, this was the season where we were having some challenges, and we went down there, and I think many of us thought we were going down there to sort of give the kids a nice experience and walk around the wards. And I think actually what the management at the time wanted us to do was to understand that we needed to be a better team and understand how to work more effectively with each other when we were under pressure. A few things hadn't gone our way. And this guy got up and he did a presentation. It was absolutely fantastic. And it was, in essence, it was very simple. He just suggested that, look, in his team, when you're talking about children's lives at stake, he can't have people in the team who are the it's not my fault type of person.
Yeah.
And he can't have people in the team who are the sort of self-flagellators, like it's always my fault. So the over-analysers, the people wanting to take responsibility with everything that's gone on. Because ultimately, people who won't take responsibility in a team environment, in a coaching environment, or you yourself as a practitioner, you have to be prepared to take responsibility. And with that comes the plaudits, and also with that comes the criticism. But at the same time, there comes a point where you can't be just going over and over analysis, something that I struggle with, the sort of self-flagellation element. So that would be my third. Those are my key three things that I think I try and lead my life and my coaching by. Big belief, but lose the ego, and understand there's lots of people out there who are great practitioners who you can always learn from. If you're in a team, you've got to become a great follower before you can become the leader. And you'll move in and out of teams, and that sort of no kind of saying it's your fault all the time, but at the same time not saying it's ever your fault is key. And yeah, those would be my key things. And then it's all tied up and bundled up with that view of having integrity and self-reflection. And those would be the key things I've learned. And I've learned that in strength and conditioning, but I've learned that in life. And I know the kind of people that I look up to, and I hope the people that I work with would see some of those traits in the way that I operate. But it's an ongoing challenge, and you have to battle with yourself sometimes.
Great answer. No, thanks for sharing that, Ben. That's really, really great and very interesting to hear. And I think a lot of people sometimes don't realise that two very different professions have a lot of very similar assets or challenges to them. They just have to be applied and managed in different ways. So that's a great example there. And then the next question I just wanted to ask actually kind of leads on nicely from that was, would you say you've had many kind of influences in your life, in your career, and could you maybe pick 2 or 3 of your top influences?
Yeah, I think if you could give me a little bit of latitude, I reflected on this as a question. I think if I was going pure S&C, I would want to flag up 3 people.
Yep.
I would want to flag up Narelle Sight, who I work with at the LTA, who is just a phenomenal. She's a wonderful practitioner who blends great scientific knowledge with unbelievable application, tough and yet unbelievably approachable, brilliant with the athletes that she works with. And I just learned a huge amount from her at a time when, to be honest, mate, most of the mentoring that I was giving you was probably, following the guidance she'd given me 2 days earlier. So she was a wonderful boss from a pure S&C perspective.
Okay.
I think tagged into that, I had limited but very valuable time with Kelvin Giles, who's a big influence on a lot of strength and conditioning practitioners around the world with his idea of physical competence. Mm-hmm. And the idea of earning the right to progress. So I found the combination of him and Narelle at that time in my career was really, really valuable. And then the other guy would be Brendan Chaplin, who's a guy that I obviously work for with SCE and the YSCA. And he's influenced me in terms of all these things we've talked about, self-reflection, but also being proactive and really putting things in a clear sort of vision and effective. He's obviously a fantastic practitioner himself and a great friend of mine. So those 3 would be the 3 that I would say from the world of S&C, but I would caveat that with saying I've had the chance to work with lots of good S&C coaches, and actually I'm at the point now where a lot of the younger guys are the guys that influence me now. So young guys who've just done their masters or going through a pathway and they're really hungry to progress and develop and push the edge of things, like yourself, like Jason, who I work with, these coaches start to have an input. So if I was just going to box it off and say there's your S&C 3, that would be that.
Yeah.
And if I was to turn around and say life 3, I've worked with some fantastic coaches in cricket. Robinson and Moores at Sussex were very, very influential.
Mm-hmm.
But if I was to pick probably 2 more people that I would want to mention, completely unrelated. One was a guy called Peter Chisholm, who was the father of the Chisholm brothers who played for Harlequins.
Yeah.
But he was my first ever PE teacher, and he was also England school soccer coach.
Mm-hmm.
And I can honestly say I've never met a more charismatic and organised, structured person and coach. And he hugely engaged me with the idea of working in sport and coaching. So I think he's the most significant influence in that regard. You know, I joke about her, but I think my wife is critical. I think the people around you are critical in terms of keeping you grounded and balanced and understanding you and sharing stuff with. So she's hugely influential. And the last person I would share is a completely random guy who looked after me a lot when I was vulnerable in my sort of late teens and 20s. He was a landscape gardener who sort of took me in, and I used to work and labour for him. And he taught me so many things about life, work ethic, having fun. Yeah, and I would suggest that alongside many other people, those 6 people probably would be key people that I would need to credit.
Fantastic. Well, thanks for sharing that. I think it's really important to have those key figures in your life, whether it's in a professional or a personal setting. I mentioned my top 3 in the first podcast episode, and one of those was actually was my PE teacher as well, which is coincidental. And I just do think that period in your life at secondary school is where you're changing from boy to man, and sport is such a great tool to kind of help that growth and development. And he really kind of believed that in me more than I believed in myself, and really helped push me towards that, using sport to kind of come out of my shell. I just think it goes so well in hand, sport and development.
It's worrying that you're in that role now, mate.
yeah. Thanks for that. I was actually going to say that the next person I mentioned was you, but I might have to edit that out now. Yeah, I might have to edit that out. So I digress. So the next question I wanted to ask, mate, is again quite a broad top 3 question. But what would you say your top 3 resources are now for information? And that's not necessarily about strength and conditioning, but just general information that you are trying to find out answers to things or questions that you have or things that you need to know.
I think a really good resource, and sort of two groups. I'm very good at you want 3 and I give you 8, so apologies for that, but that's just where I am. I think something that I've found very valuable is a lot of Dr. McGill's work on back health.
Yeah.
And I think you encounter quite a lot of that, particularly working with young populations and navigating that with sort of peak height velocity changes and loadings and that sort of stuff. So I found that very useful, alongside the work of sort of Greg Meyer. If you look those guys up on Google, their websites will flash up on ACL prevention. So if you're going for 2 S&C kind of people, I think obviously the work of Fagenbaum and Lloyd and the guys on the sort of youth S&C side, and our YSCA position statements on its way, and the work of the ASCA. There's a lot of good stuff out there in terms of those sort of standard resources, but I found McGill and Meyer's stuff really useful. And I also I'm into the sort of broader self-development stuff. The Stephen Covey, I don't know if you've read the sort of 7 Habits of Effective People. I think I've got the order right there.
Yes, yeah.
And how that charts the journey of being dependent to independent to interdependent in terms of your outlook and your growth, and how you interact with people. I mean, some of it I've found really kind of sort of eureka, mind-blowing moments in that it's like it's so simple, but it's absolutely so right. So that would be kind of my answer to that.
Fantastic. Well, no, again, thanks for sharing that. It's really useful. I think I'll make sure that the links to those things you mentioned again in the show notes, so people can access them in their own time. But there are, again, they're all things that I've read or am reading at the moment, and bits of information that I also find very interesting. So the next question, and you can answer this as the elite athlete you are, or the or the elite coach you are. It's up to you where you want to go with it. But what would you say your top 3 kind of performance exercises or drills are right now that you use in day to day?
Yeah, I think a really good question. I think that one of the things I'm using quite a lot, and I don't know if you've seen it, Ryan, is the Vern Gambetta. So clearly another wonderful S&C practitioner, sort of the father of functional training, in inverted commas.
Yeah.
I was privileged to sort of see one of his workshops where he does a drill called the power dot into the speed dot, which is where you have a diamond shape set of markers on the floor, set up at key distances to work on power steps into speed quickness steps.
Okay.
And it's fantastic because it's one of those great things where there are so many layers to it. So you can be talking about adding value to any athlete, a pro athlete, a young athlete who has issues with sort of agility patterning and stepping off either foot and understanding the sort of size of the steps that need to be used in certain situations and drilling that in a kind of planned agility way, because clearly they're then going to take it into a full agility reactive response orientated situation. But the beauty of it as well is it's also an unbelievably good end stage rehab tool for people with ankle, groin, knee problems, because you can pattern key movements and it's a great way of watching them progress and seeing in a very dynamic way. When you move away from, you can hop on the spot, you can do your functional strength work when it's now dynamic. So I really like that. So that's something I'm using more and more. And like everything in coaching, completely stolen from his workshop. I'm not taking any credit for it. He came up with that, I believe, but he may well have seen somebody else do it. I don't know. But that's great. I think in the gym, it's a great question, isn't it? I had a question the other day. Do you believe in front squats or do you believe in back squats?
Yeah.
And I kind of chuckled a little bit because it's like, well, all of these exercises have merit depending on who you're working with. And I think the big thing for me is that you fit the program to the athlete, not the athlete to the program. So I feel slightly uncomfortable saying, "Oh yeah, I love a power clean, or I love a hang clean, or I love a split squat, or a Bulgarian split squat," because I'm not quite sure. I believe that any exercises you go to type of prescription until you know what you're dealing with and why you're dealing with. So I'm more of a kind of tools in the toolbox view in that regard, and that's very political dodging the question. So in terms of that, I'm not sure I've really given you enough there.
So I'll tell you what. Let me just digress and say, what would be the exercise you use most in the gym at the moment?
Me, clearly the hammer curl.
Hello, it is Ryan, and we could all use an extra bright spot in our day, couldn't we? Just to make up for things like sitting in traffic, doing the dishes, counting your steps, all the mundane stuff. That is why I'm such a big fan of Chumba Casino. Chumba Casino has all your favorite social casino-style games that you can play for free anytime, anywhere with daily bonuses. That should brighten your day a little. Actually, a lot. So sign up now at ChumbaCasino.com. That's ChumbaCasino.com.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. See terms and conditions. 18+.
Well, I'm not talking about you, bicep curly. I'm talking about what you'd use with your athletes. Is there a specific piece of equipment or movement you do more than you would any others?
I'm very much on. I'm a big believer in pulling movements. And variations of that. So I believe that most of the young athletes you work with need to do much more pulling than they do currently in their training program.
I couldn't agree more, yeah.
So I will do a lot of horizontal pull variations, vertical pull variations, and I will look to probably go, and again, this is a general, this is not specific, but I will look to do a kind of 2-to-1, 3-to-1 in relation to pull press type of activities. Because I know that a lot of young kids are going to go and do a load of pressing anyway. So I think that's very important. I also think that finding ways to, particularly with female athletes, hammy and glute work, training the hammies and the glutes, for example, just a very simple exercise like a hamstring raise on a box, holding it with control and getting endurance, quality and strength in the hamstrings and the glutes complex is absolutely critical. And if you said to me, we have young ladies arriving with us in the sixth form, often very good sportswomen, often have very little S&C experience. We're straight into doing a lot of posterior chain, hamstring, dumbbell RDLs, progressing into RDLs, glute ham work. That is really where I'm at. So a lot of pulling work and a lot of glute ham work.
Fantastic.
If I had to be put on the spot.
Yeah,
but
so I do.
Everybody needs different things.
I didn't want to put you on the spot, and I think you couldn't have answered that question better, because it isn't about one exercise fitting you all. It's about what's best for the athlete in front of you. And coming back to that squat question, well, if you ask me that, I would say, well, why can't you do them all? And then try and make each improve your techniques in all of those different areas for those different types of squats, and then use the one that you feel benefits you most. I think I think you're spot on, and I think in that question I turned around to the person and I said, well, who are you working with, and is it a hip dominant or a knee dominant workout? Yeah, because that might determine which way. Are you deadlifting? Are you in one workout? Because you wouldn't probably back squat. And I started moving into that kind of programming thought process, and that was when the particular person glazed over a little bit, and I understood what they were saying. They were coming from the perspective of, some people get on really well with front squats and some people don't. But again, I've got a golfer that I wouldn't do front squats with at the moment because he's got wrist impingements and issues, but by the same token I've got a skier who for various reasons we look at the front squat over the back squat. But again, it's very much situation dependent, and understanding that it fits into a whole. I think this is a big bugbear of mine. I think in the world of the fitness industry, you will have lots of people going, this solves everything. Kettlebells is what you need, and Olympic lifting is what you need, and whatever, CrossFit is what you need. And the reality of it is all of these training modalities and styles, they all have huge merit, they all have huge value, but they are not the panacea. So I'm a big believer in you've got to be, as a coach, competent and mindful of all of these things and apply them effectively to the person you're working with in front of you. Sure. As you very pithily and sort of concisely suggested earlier. Yeah, well, that's very gracious of you to say, mate. But I think it's especially with young athletes, you're trying to give them maximise their opportunity to do as much as they possibly can, and in a safe way that's complementing their growth and their development. And I think if you don't give them that broad range and expose them to different stimuluses and different movements and get them to try different things, I just don't think you're giving them the best chance. So it's nice to have a variety as well for them, so they keeps it interesting.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
So, last questions. This last one's a little bit of a philosophical question, but is that
the same as philosophical?
Yeah, exactly. It's the it's funny how the signal's deteriorating when I said that. Yeah, but you managed to hear it perfectly. So what are the? I had to drive 9 hours back from Edinburgh last night. I'm a bit tired. That's my excuse. What?
There's no bin man out there to blame.
No, there aren't. No, I've run out of excuses. So what would you say your top 3 pieces of advice would be in life, exercise, and sport that you would live by at this present day?
The first thing I would say is don't get Ryan to ask you questions, because they're very, very good and they're quite demanding. That would be the first piece of advice. So that's a time buyer.
Okay, like it.
My three. This is one I've struggled with. What are my 3 things? I may have touched on them. I may have touched on them already in what we've discussed. I would suggest that, firstly, above all else, you need to have a very clear idea of work ethic, putting in the time, putting in the effort, and getting out there and working hard if you want to be outstanding at anything. And that's very, very obvious. But I think too often in life we see people give up or not push forwards. And I think about the example of Jason, who works with me here. He's a fabulous practitioner. He came through an interview process of 70 people for the job here. And he's learned and developed and progressed, and he's always had that work ethic. And I know from my own perspective, it's tiring, when you're getting up in the morning and you're 40 years old and you can't get out of bed anymore, to get up and do your gym sessions at 6:45 every morning in the gym with the young people. And you've been doing that for 9 years, as I have. That's challenging, and I think work ethic is central. If you're not prepared to put it in, then there's no point trying to be out excellent at anything.
Yeah, sure.
So that would be my absolute headline. However, that moves on to point 2, is that if your work ethic rides roughshod over your value set and your morals, and how you treat people, then no one's going to go with you. And actually, it's that old analogy of, anybody can win the rat race, but you're still a rat. So I think that I believe hugely in everything has to be driven with good integrity and value set. And clearly you can get into a big debate about, that's not me preaching in the sense that, people have different views of honesty and trustworthiness. But I think we're all pretty comfortable knowing what that's about. And having that integrity is the second key thing. So work ethic, integrity, and a value set. And I think the final point, and this is something that I really battle with, and that is try and have a lot of fun and try and enjoy every second of life, the tribulations, the upsides, everything.
Sure.
And I go back to my point that I made about my experience with Bali, and we've all had it, and I'm sure there are many listeners who are experiencing loss in their life or challenges. Fundamentally, there's enough in life to get your head, drop down and feel down. So it's really very much in your control how you deal with all of those things and how you get on with life. And I think that for me has to underpin everything, because you've got to enjoy what you do, and you've got to have fun, and you've got to have a positive attitude, and you've got to laugh when all you feel like doing is crying. And I think that's life, and that's coaching, that's sport. I mean, sport more than anything else. The young lady who had that unfortunate thing in the Winter Olympics.
Sure. Excuse
my ignorance. She had the difficult one in the previous one where she fell. She's got to pick herself up and do the next 2 events, and that's life, isn't it? So there you go. Those are my 3 things: enjoy and savor every moment, because you don't know how many you're going to get. Make sure you base everything on your integrity, and if you want to be good, you've got to have a great work ethic.
Fantastic pieces of advice and wisdom there, Ben. Thanks for sharing that. And I definitely would like to just kind of add a little bit onto that last point. But having fun is I mentioned this in the first episode of this podcast about looking after yourself, especially if you're a young coach and you're starting out your journey. It's not easy, and you have to put in a lot of hours, and you have to work very hard, and it does become a full-time role, and it's very easy to forget to look after yourself when you're looking after other people. So being able to designate those little parts of the day where you can just chill and recharge your batteries, I think is vitally important, especially in a high-pressured environment where it's high-performance sport or educational. There's a lot of things going on around you all the time, and I think it's easy to forget to take a break and to recharge your batteries. And if you don't do that, it sometimes can go wrong.
And I think, you're right, absolutely right. And I think these are one of the things I've learned from my our friend Brendan, and that is, after I finish this podcast with you today, I'm hooking up with one of my best mates, and we're going to get in the car and we're going to go and see another one of my best mates from years back. We're going to have 2 days just getting away from it all, and I'm very lucky that my wife affords me that opportunity to have a bit of a break from the kids, as much as I don't want to be away from the kids, but I need that break. But I'm already having those thoughts of, will I take my laptop with me? Should I do these emails? Should I pick up that piece of work? And there is the great battle.
Yeah.
If you've got a work ethic and you're used to having to work really hard to get somewhere, it's very difficult also to work very hard at switching off. And you find that most coaches, in my experience, have that kind of gene of that they're naturally fairly caring and they want to make a difference and they want to work hard for people. But like you say, you're absolutely useless to anybody if you don't invest in yourself and have a bit of a break.
Sure.
So I'm going to enjoy my 2 days. And I might have a couple of beers with my friends, and that will be great. And then I'll come back and I'm ready to throw myself into the next half term and whatever list of jobs my wife has created for me in my absence.
I'm not going to hold you up any longer. But I just the last thing I wanted to ask was if people wanted to get in touch with you, where can they find you?
Well, what I would suggest is if people want to email me, my email is benhaining@hotmail.com. I have a work email, but I like to kind of keep that sort of stuff separate because obviously you can fill up your inbox and all of that. But if people want to reach out to me, they're more than welcome to. I'd recommend they have a look at some of the stuff we pop on the YSCA blog.
Mm-hmm.
But again, if people want to reach out or have a chat, that's where they can find me.
Bro.
And like I said, I always think it's really important as a young coach that you do reach out to people, which is one of your great strengths, which is why you achieved all that you've achieved, is that you had the belief that we talked about to say, I'd like to put myself in front of you. I remember a young Ryan Blake, even better looking than he is now, coming finding me and saying, this is me, this is what I'm about. Let me know if there's any S&C opportunities. And the first thing I thought was, good for you. And I think that's really important. And if that means reaching out to coaches who've got networks and people, then go ahead and do that. But obviously do that respectfully, because obviously we're all very busy and we'll do our best to get back to you.
Sure. No, I completely agree with you, mate. And I think you're never gonna know the answer unless you ask the question, are you? In whatever context or scenario that is. So don't be afraid to ask if you need to find some information out or need help, because people love giving advice, and they might not be able to give it to you straight away, but I'm sure, especially in the community and the professions that we work in, that everyone is, or most people are very friendly and more than happy to share and impart wisdom and to help people along their way. So it's nice to be a part of that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Brilliant. Well, hopefully that's been a useful use of your time, mate.
Yeah, well, I guess thanks for joining us, and thanks for sharing everything. And if you just want to just stay on the line, Ben, and we can wrap things up. For all our listeners, all of the information that Ben's just discussed and the conversations we've just had, I will put all the links into the show notes. And thanks for joining us, and we'll be back very soon for another episode of the ExtremeSportsPerformance.com podcast.
Thanks for listening to the third episode. We hope you enjoyed the show. Please don't hesitate to leave us a rating or review on your listening platform of choice. If you haven't already, please check out our website. We have weekly blogs on our blog page. You can sign up to our monthly newsletter via our sign up page. Our online store consists of personal coach, training programs, nutrition plans, interactive training systems, toolbox, and coming very soon, membership packages. We also have several social media platforms: Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. Links to all these can be found at the bottom of every page on our website or via any search engine. That's all for now. Until next time, take care.
It is Ryan Seacrest here. There was a recent social media trend which consisted of flying on a plane with no music, no movies, no entertainment. But a better trend would be going to ChumbaCasino.com. It's like having a mini social casino in your pocket. Chumba Casino has over 100 online casino-style games, all absolutely free. It's the most fun you can have online and on a plane. So grab your free welcome bonus now at ChumbaCasino.com. Sponsored by Chumba Casino.
No